integrating or digesting these impressions, when all this data is coming in constantly, our aspects of our minds are constructing this universe, and there's only certain things that we'll pay attention to, and we'll respond to certain things in certain habitual ways. And part of the process of breaking identification is challenging those constructs and actually trying to make ourselves fresh to these impressions once again, like we were when we were little kids.
I want to add something about, you're in a state now where when you meet someone, you know instantly if you like them.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you meet someone and you instantly dislike them? Are you looking then for a trigger that is causing that feeling in you? Are you, do you try to examine why it is that you have an instant dislike for somebody?
I'm always
Back off from that, you know, and think, well,
I don't second judge the impressions. I just note them as data. It's not, see, just because I like someone doesn't mean I have to act in a certain way around them, or not act in a certain way. Well, that's my point. Just because I have this instant dislike arise. Right, or dislike usually arises because something like, I don't trust that guy. I don't trust that guy. Or something like that. Or something like that. It's usually on that level. It doesn't have to govern how I interact with that person. And I certainly don't second guess it. But my practice for for over 3 decades now has been to always be witnessing and interrogating my experience, always. So that's nothing special that I have to add. And, I might, I suppose, wonder why that strong impression came up for that person. But I don't have to know these things. That's one of the things that that people get in the habit of, because this is another one of those things. There was a gentleman asking about a Zen koan earlier. In the Zen tradition, there's this clear articulation of dispensing with the judgment of things as good or bad. The good or bad comes out of the android personality aspect of judgment. Just because I don't like something doesn't mean they're good or bad. Doesn't mean they're bad. And just because I like someone doesn't mean they're good. It's this simplistic. All it is it's a single snapshot. At this moment, this impression arose in my consciousness. Oh, that's interesting. It does not have to govern a single thing, because I am striving always through witnessing these things neutrally and interrogating anything that seems to stick around for a while, as to, what the heck's going on with this? What's arising in me? Why is it arising? Who am I? What am I doing? And why am I doing it? That's the formulation that Robert Ennis had.
As a footnote to that, a time-honored fourth way technique for dealing with an impression that arises like that is to move closer to the person that's causing that trigger.
Exactly.
That's
see what
one.
it's all about.
Well, that's one form of what's called conscious suffering, which is the willingness to move against the inertia or the gradient
Or
that
the imagined threat.
right, and to then do that with a kind of presence where you're seeing what's being called up, so you can scrutinize that more clearly. that's a more advanced kind of practice that one becomes engaged in after one has more of a foundation of just being able to establish internal presence or internal observation. But that's a way that you can do what Rob was describing, to explore when we discover the triggers in our lives, when we discover the things that cause this stuff to arise in us, then we can start to actively go towards it. And that's part of how you accelerate the composting process.
Did you want to?
Okay.
Yeah, but what do you mean by interrogating your experience? Is that some kind of analysis, or?
No. I just mean asking those questions. What am I? Who am I? What am I doing? And why am I doing it? And not necessarily using a voice in my head, but having this sense of wishing to ask who and what I am.
Being open to seeing.
Being open to seeing stuff. That's exactly right. So I want to conclude, if that's acceptable to you, with an observation about Walter, since he is subject or the person we're dedicating this talk to. It was my good fortune to get to see him in many contexts, but I mentioned at the Sutra Salon earlier. And in the Sutra Salon, we read a variety of different Buddhist texts. And some of them were wonderfully inspirational, beautiful, and a pleasure to read. Others of them would involve what for many of us would be incredible mental drudgery in exposing oneself to lists. There's a particular set of texts called the Vinaya, for example, which is the rules that Buddhist monks are supposed to follow, and how they were codified, and how the Buddha proclaimed them, and so forth. And most people, a lot of people just stopped reading them, and then came back after the Vinaya was done, or would be constantly at every meeting sort of complaining, oh, here's this stupid rule, and blah, blah, blah. And Walter, at his 87 or 88 years, or whatever it was at the time, explained with his incredible vivacity and capacity for enjoying life, how he loved reading the Vinaya. It brought him closer to the Buddha, because it's all stories about people misbehaving, monks misbehaving, and then Buddha telling them how they screwed up and why. And now there's a rule for dealing with the situation, and here's what the rule is. And he thought it was just wonderful. It was this source of inspiration for him. And I mentioned this because I want to underscore the point that I made earlier about the student in Tucson that I mentioned. And what I was attempting to point out to her is that these reactive responses to life are only compulsory and compulsive when we surrender our responsibility to them. And when we do, life becomes heavy and hard to bear. But when we learn the trick, as Walter did, of letting go of that habit of identification, then life can be this series of wonderful adventures and investigations and disclosures, exciting, no matter how old or young you are. I think that's a good place to end, unless you have the final comment.
Just we should speak to any gardening classes that you
Right, okay. Yes, we have right there over on the window there's something you can see called Refuge of Presence Practice Group. And that's a group that we have here every Tuesday except the fourth Tuesdays of the month. That's when the Sutra Salon meets in this space. We also have some monthly co-meditation workshops. The next one will be on Saturday, February 13th. That's at Taiyu House, about 3 miles from here. And There's various other activities from time to time, and if you want to be a